And then from there, I got a full scholarship to St. Louis University, and I got a degree in accounting. And then from there, like Manny, I went on to UTSA and became a road runner. And what's significant about UTSA this year is everybody knows they got this great football team, right? And it went to a conference championship. And I don't know if you know me, the sponsor for the Conference USA Championship was a property tax protest company. That's how bad this is, the situation that we're in. And but I give you that as a background leading up to the fact that I'm 62. My mother lived to be almost 100. So praise the Lord that, you know, I have a face for radio, but I at least I look a little younger than I am. And so, you know, I tell people, you know, I've got scriptural authority. Let me tell you what Jesus said about taxes, but we won't go on that. I'm not here to preach at you. But we've been active with the Christian Chamber in San Antonio by way of Texas. And we tell people, if that's not your motivation, it's okay. Because the governor, who isn't Caesar, he's not the king, and he knows I know 2 + 2 is because his mother-in-law was my grade school teacher, that he will reference quite often the Texas Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Quite often. And your right that we're talking about tonight is the sixth right, the right to contest a decision. A decision that's been made by the county appraisal district, not by the tax collector, not by the appraisal review board panel, but by the appraisal district, by way of some of the pressure that's been brought to bear by the property value studies of the comptroller. Okay, so that's how the order of authority comes. But here's your order of capacity, your authority. If you say, well, you know, is it okay to do this? Yes, we think everybody should do it. And I hope that you're going to walk out of here and you're going to tell everybody, at the very least, file your notice and request the evidence, rather than complaining about it afterwards. So we're going to cover your right to protest, your right to the government's evidence, and I'm going to show you the distinction in Bexar County from the promulgated form of the comptroller, where it doesn't clearly state that you have the right to the evidence before you ever get to the hearing. And we're also going to go through a best evidence, what I call presentation strategy. Somebody sitting in your chair listened to about half of this, what I have tonight. It was all of it, and he said, I think I know what you're talking about. What does this look like? And then we're going to follow his case. I'll go all the way through from gathering the evidence to arbitration. So the last, I love this quote. It says, tax avoidance is not tax evasion. You know, I'm an income tax expert. That's what I got my master's in. So I deal with revenue officers, liens, levies, criminal investigation division. If I need a heart transplant, I don't go to the appraisal district. I look for a revenue officer because I know they've never used their heart. But that's just a little aside, you know, that I'm not here to slam the appraisal district, but rather empower you to understand what the pressure is there. And so the effective date in Bexar County, we'll go through the difference, but there is no difference. The valuation date is January 1st. Not what you could sell it for today, not what you bought it for a year ago, but as of January 1st, what was your property value worth? When considering what it would take to go to market, there's a lot of things that might have happened since January 1st. So I just came from Manny's house. I mean, it's looking better. Looks great in my opinion, but he's got pictures of all the things he's had to do since January 1st. That's evidence that it wasn't ready for market January 1st, even though he bought it a year ago. He took it down before he brought it back up. And he's on the right period of time. January 1st is the effective date. Now our filing date, the last date we have to file a protest is, I think it's May 31st in Bandera, which is Tuesday. I'll get my dates right, Tuesday? Yeah. And I don't know, I should have asked, but I don't know if Bandera has an email address where you can just email it, but as close as everybody lives, at the very least, put it in the mail. But get a certified, get evidence that you did it. So
I don't trust them. I want it date stamped and everything in there.
So yeah, you can obviously hand deliver it, but if they have an email address and you're dealing with some friend, family, or neighbor that's further away, just get them in the pipeline.
Yeah.
For their sake, for your sake, for everybody's sake.
There's an online portal and an email address.
And we're going to talk about, you know, the fact that I prefer you to email versus e-file. And there's a portal, and Manny's the most digital person I know. I call him all the time because I know he's at his computer. But sometimes we need to recognize that we want to do person-to-person communication, not just property-to-property data. Because actually sometimes that appraiser or the panel appreciates who you are or what it is that you bring to the conversation rather than just the facts of your property. Now, so I prefer you to email it, you know, or rather, excuse me, I don't encourage using the portal, but that's a personal choice. But again, I don't see anybody here that wouldn't, you know, maybe they like your facial hair, right? Maybe they appreciate that you're like myself, or a little more mature. Who knows what it is that they might relate to? But I think that you're better off having them hear you by phone or even video conference. And I've literally handled arbitrations from my computer on the side of the road in Seguin on behalf of a property that was in Matagorda, owned by somebody in Fort Bend, in front of an arbitrator that was in Houston. So the blessing of COVID is that we could never be in a more convenient mindset. You do not have to go down there. Go ahead.
I would double check first to make sure they're Zoom capable this year.
That's right. But at the very least, if they're allowing you a phone conference, then you do. Because the Attorney General said we had to have a hearing, and then during COVID, we couldn't go down to the county offices because there was such limited resources. They weren't going to take a chance that we bring it into the. So the Attorney General said, that's fine, but you're going to have to then make it possible. And so each county has its own style, and I appreciate the editorial comments because, but for the most part, they're trying to be more efficient. In fact, I think you were saying in Kendall County that they're not having any in-person hearings.
Correct.
That's correct. So I mean, I prefer person to person, however you want to do it, but you can get started through the portal and then opt into something that's more personal if you want. But again, I cannot emphasize enough, we're talking about January 1st valuation. So if there's still work to be done, you want an estimate. If there's work that's been done, you've got an invoice. And you hopefully have pictures, and you hopefully have facts, and we'll talk why you want both. So the reason many of us don't do it, and I think this county is not much different from what I was told in terms of the number of protests that were filed last year, but in Bexar County, we're reaching a record of 160,000 protests. But in Texas, in general, 80% of the taxpayers do not protest their value. And that's a record low, 80%. It's only, we're hoping maybe get it to 75. And you ask yourself, well, why is that? Because we get a notice that looks something like this. In Bexar County, you don't have to read the detail. 5 times on that notice of value, it says, this is not a bill. This is not an invoice. Do not pay. Well, if you get something from the government and they tell you 5 times, at least in Bexar County, even as slow as we are, we know, well, I guess I don't have to deal with this. Toss it aside. But if we would only turn the form over in Bexar County, I know you might have it on a separate form, and what we have is makes us special. We're a friendly county, not too quick, or really friendly. We actually put it in writing. Don't forget to request the evidence. I mean, you can't make it more blunt than that. They just didn't put the star, but they put it in red. So that's 1/3 of 1 page. I blew it up a little bit just to emphasize it. They also asked this year, you know, for our email and for our phone number. They're not selling that information, but it does make it possible if they're going to allow for telephone hearings or maybe a Zoom. It does make it possible that you don't have to necessarily go down there. Now I know it's convenient for maybe most of you here, but just keep that in mind for some of your friends that are further away. The most important reason, or generally the most common reason that you're going to check is that you have an incorrect appraised value compared to market comps, or that the properties you're being compared to are taxed at a lower value. If they're taxed at a higher value, then as I said before, 80% of your neighbors aren't protesting. So if 80% aren't protesting, I don't even dignify it. Now, that may not be appreciated by the appraiser that I say, look, don't tell me what my neighbor's values are and they're already up here. You know, I don't know if they protested or didn't. But like the expert said, and the Bandera County confirmed the number of protests that they have compared to the total. We'll talk through that. If the majority of people aren't protesting, don't tell me what the majority of people's values are that you put a value on. So I won't dignify that with a response. But if it's lower, then in the words of our chief appraiser, you know, point it out to him and don't help him do his job if it works against you. So They ask you in section 4, I don't know your form exactly, but it usually says, do you want to provide facts that may help resolve this protest and the method of delivery? I put not at this time. I don't negotiate against myself. I don't start off by telling them everything that I don't even have organized, because I don't even know what I should be responding to. And again, in Bear County, we have a box that says evidence requested. It's in red. Now, you don't have to have that box, but you do need to put it perhaps in this box. Please provide CAD evidence. If you get nothing else out of tonight, file the notice of protest, put please provide CAD, or County Appraisal District evidence. It's critical that you ask for the evidence. Just like, because you're essentially, although you may not feel like criminals, you're essentially being told this is the value. You want to say, well, where did you get the numbers? And if you put it in writing, they have to give it. And if you don't put it in writing, by legislative action, they cannot volunteer. I know it sounds like it's stacked against us a little bit. And this is not the local chief appraiser. This is the state law. So you have to put it in writing. Please provide County Appraisal District evidence. And then from there, we're in the game. If it's in the game, it's in the game. We've made a reservation at the restaurant and we've asked for the menu. And that's it. That's how we start.
Mike, on the other page, you had the check on other, on that down there, you know, just if you could touch on.
I just check other just because it's kind of like a blank check, you know what I mean? Because you might have something that just really comes at you. Usually, the only other things that apply here are, you know, maybe an exemption wasn't, you know, considered, but most of these other kind of all fall under the umbrella of value. So I check other just for the sake of, oh, and I forgot, right? But your reason for protest ultimately comes down to value, unless it's an exemption issue.
What if you did not check that?
It's all right.
Can you bring it up
No.
during your informal?
They generally are not, and I don't know what your experience was, but go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was on the appraisal review
Yeah,
board here in
absolutely.
Junior County the last 3 years, and the chairman last year, when there was another, big bump. But when you said informal, that's what triggered it, you know, when you have an informal discussion with them, you can request that, which is always a good idea, I think. Sometimes you can resolve a lot of things, especially errors, up front, without protest. But I think the biggest thing is if you're not talking about an informal, like I said, you should always put the other on there, as he said, because you may very well come up with additional photos. There may be other issues that come up between the time that you filed your protest and the time you actually go in to have that, you know, your time in front of the appraisal review board.
So you're still ahead of the deadline, so let me answer the question.
I've already turned that in, and I did not check other. I was wondering if I could bring it up.
I think you should, if you want, just to cover, I don't know the mood of the county rate. You could amend your protest because the deadline hasn't passed. So I would tell you that if you hadn't requested the evidence until you read on it tonight, just file another one. If they're getting 2 of them, they're not picking the one that favors them. You filed them both timely. So it's an amended request and add whatever you want. Okay? So you're good. And that's why I got here before the end of the deadline, so that we might be able to catch a few more people on the way down there, or even if you're down there, you'll be more prepared. So, again, May 31st is the deadline. So you may have filed it, or you're amending your filing. Fair enough?
That's good.
Okay, well, good. Now, I made a phone call, and I don't know if this is exactly the way it breaks down, but they told me there was 6 appraisers in the appraisal office. And while we can get into the details of, are they field appraisers, chief appraiser, blah, 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 what I want to emphasize is that they cannot get to 36,000 accounts, 6,000 appraisals per appraiser between January 1st and April 1st. They can't even do it by drone. They use what we call mass appraisal. That's so when we buy a house, when Vicki helps you find a property and you have to go get a loan, what do? You get a fee-based appraisal. And a fee-based appraisal demands generally that the appraiser go in that property, walk in, visit it, be very specific, it's paid very well to do it, I mean, at least compared to 6,000 appraisals that are done per appraiser. So if you own that math, you kind of own the fact that, well, maybe they made a mistake. I don't know about you, the only thing I've done 6,000 times, I feel like I've done this 6,000 times, but is breathe, right? Since January 1st, because remember the effective date was January 1st. Don't tell me that they've been on staff since last October. And I'm not trying to minimize the fact that they get ready for the season. They couldn't value it. If the house burned down because of the fireworks on New Year's Eve, what are we talking about? Land and slab. But contrary to that, making you feel good about that, if you're in Houston and your home got flooded, then what happened? They got flooded, generally the big flood you heard about, that was in the spring. Yet there they were having to protest the property value fully functioning as of January 1st. So it cuts both ways. And I really want to emphasize that because the more Manny and I talk, we're the best of friends. I follow him on Facebook, but I didn't realize, wow, Manny, there's a lot that's been done since then. So they don't have the county does not have the time or the money to do a specific appraisal. I tell, when I have a heckler in the crowd, which bless you so far, y'all have been polite, but you know, there's always somebody, if I got a crowd of 150 people, says, you know, I protested last year and they just came back with a higher value and they're just vindictive and here's the chief appraisers here, appraisers and the hecklers over there. I said, sir, you may be special in your mother's eyes, but you're not that special. She's got so much work, I would rather go with her to the County Appraisal District Board of Directors and get her a bigger budget if we could raise the numbers to justify that she needs more help, or he needs more help, whoever that chief appraiser is. So, this is what they define as mass appraisal. It's a lot of multisyllabic words, but I'll read it to you. Using standard methodology, employing common data, allowing for statistical data. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, what do they say? We threw a blanket over the county, and to the best of our ability, we took sections and we said, well, they're worth this per square foot, and land is this, and that structure's this, and we're done. And here's the love letters coming at you. When did y'all get yours? Mid-April? Give or take?
Yeah. We can start getting them, didn't we?
Early May?
Started getting them.
Just, you know,
Oh, I forgot, it's April.
Yeah.
This is the end of May, so probably late April. But this is what they're up against, okay? And so doesn't that give rise to the possibility that they can make mistakes? That's all I'm not allowing for. None of us are perfect, but in their case, it's stacked against them. So these mass appraisals could lead to mistakes because they don't know about the deferred maintenance. They don't know about your popcorn ceiling. They don't know about the termite damage. They don't know, even if they drove up and down the street. So if you painted the outside, what does that say about the inside? They don't know you may have some functional issues. You know, you may have some location issues. You may be located to, what's your buddy? Yeah, you know, where it's got, it looks like you know, there's something going on next door, and it just doesn't seem to work.
Like a math lab?
Well,
oh, that would be one of them.
not in his case, but you know.
It's true.
It's been
It's
done.
not working.
I'm gonna show you a picture of a man who has a manufacturing facility, and it's immaculate. No taking, I mean, it is, and you can eat off the floors because they clean hospital and hotel linen. So you can imagine, they gotta keep a pretty clean place. And there's barbed wire around the whole place. I said, what's the barbed wire for? He says, that's because there was a meth house across the street, and the police actually used his location to check that.
Yeah.
And at the hearing, I said, we've got a rap sheet on the property. And he said, well, there's crime everywhere. I said, well, I don't care about crime everywhere. There's crime here, and you show me the like-type properties that have the same crime situation. So you're funny, but you're actually very true. So the appraiser can make adjustments, but if they don't make adjustments at the informal hearing, as I call it, conversation, and you go in front of a panel, the panel may see clear to say, you know what, appraiser missed it, we're gonna give you a little bit more, okay? And so, you know, we're not gonna talk about all the exemptions because we could be here all night long, and I'm not very sophisticated as to the difference between this school district and that city and that county, and, or, you know, but I can tell you, you wanna make sure you tell all your friends and family, if you didn't apply for your homestead, apply for your homestead. If you're over 65, if you're a disabled vet, you know, they'll work with you on that. And the evidence to prove that's pretty simple, you know, generally speaking. I mean, I've lived there, here's my utility bill. I'm over 65, here's my birth certificate. Sable vet, you've got documents to prove that. So we're not gonna talk about exemptions so much, but we will talk about the homestead cap and how that impacted in this case study. So if you request the evidence, which I can't tell you enough, let me give you something to think about. You wouldn't go to a gunfight with a switchblade. At least I pray you wouldn't, right? Because you wouldn't be prepared. So you're gonna be more prepared for the hearing if you know what they're gonna say before they say it. You already know what they're gonna say. Yes, sir.
How much in advance do they have to prepare the evidence package?
Well, glad that you can, you're on cue. 14 days, that's okay. 14 days prior to the formal hearing, the state law requires that, in other words, if they gave you the evidence, let's say you put your application in on Tuesday, last day, you got it in there, and then they give it to you June 6th. They can't schedule the formal ARB hearing for 14 days. I mean, they can schedule it, but no sooner than 14 days. There's a window to give you time to prepare. And under the current state law, there's even the requirement that if it's your homestead, you're entitled to one reschedule. Now, we're not talking about the informal hearing, which gives you the opportunity to have a conversation, maybe settle it in a real friendly manner. I don't think it's unfriendly to go in front of the ARB panel, and but I do think that that's a distinction. But you have 14 days from when they give it to you. So if they send it to you and you already had a hearing set up, say, hey, I need to reschedule. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes, I mean, I went down already and requested the packet, and they said we don't have one.
But if you put it in writing, then they need to get it to you. That's state law.
Okay.
Okay, so put it in writing.
All right.
And let me tell you, if I was the chief appraiser of Bear County and I saw him say this to 300 people, he says, my hands are tied by legislative action. If you don't request it in writing, I can't just offer it. And that's why, if you notice back there, he's the only person that has it in red. I mean, where he's saying, please ask me for it, I'll give it to you. Because that usually helps settle cases.
It's not even on our form, you have to write it.
Right.
Right, and we're not special, we're not being abusive in Van Buren. I've been to, I don't know how many counties, I'm losing count, but I can tell you so far, out of the 254 counties, not only Bear was the one that taught me this, and Wilson changed as a result of the seminars we put on last year. But out of the other 252, I don't expect to find anybody else telling you, because it only just increases the workload, to your point. But that's okay. The state law protects you. And that's why I'm so blessed that y'all are here, regardless of what, if I come back and there's 100 people, because everybody should know this. But the comptroller hasn't seen fit to change the promulgated form. So every appraiser says, well, we use the promulgated form of the comptroller. And I said, well, Mr. Hager, would you get off behind? Because you could just modify the form, but he doesn't. So in that evidence package, you're gonna find 3 components. One of them is gonna be your measurements and statistics. And I think you were telling a great story. Before you got on the ARB panel as the chairperson, she got the bright idea of, this year I'm gonna protest my own. And everything about, it seems like, I've never heard so many things. It seemed like they said that there was natural water. They said that the measurements were something different than what, just give us a few bullet points.
Yeah, now one was, like I said, when I first got on the board, like I said, decided to protest. So the first thing, I had 6 different cards. They're called cards, and that's, various surveys. I thought I had, one chunk of property and that was it. So you get one for where your house is and a couple of acres, about 5 usually. And then I have these 5 other cards. And they were all just cedar, right? Cedar and hills and whatever. And, but I was being charged a different price per acre on each of those segments. But when you put them all together, it was all the same stuff. And then of course, secondarily, naturally occurring water. There's a code that's on this card that kind of says what your land table is and gives you a code. Well, I said, what's that W mean? Well, that RW, residential water, had that changed. There's no naturally occurring water that any of us could find. So those were several of the ones. And then of course, other issues when it comes to what is on your plat, when it comes to the documentation from your survey, double check to make sure it matches the amount that you're being charged with. Because other things like easements and roads
And if you live on the lake, there's still a lot of controversy from the 1884 and the 1883 and whatever maps are being used, because people get charged for the dirt. I'm sorry, for the edge of the lake out to a certain point. And that's just another of those things when it comes to measurements or what you really should be taxed for.
And this is such a incredible, Nikki, Manny and I, and we're so blessed. Thank you so much for letting us not only use the space, but to participate. Because I tell everybody, I said, you might have a roof line, but maybe you have a covered porch. So the roof line isn't the equivalent of the climate controlled space. But if they were looking at it with a drone, or they say, well, here's your roof, they assume that the whole house is air conditioned, so they make a mistaken measurement. Land, they might make a mistake in the measurement of the land. So does it happen often? Well, this blows me away, but the point I'm making is, even if it's only 10 or 20% of the time, it's worth checking. Don't assume they got it right. So that's one of the factors in the evidence package. The second part I've already spoken to is the equities. They call it equity values. Those are the properties that they're saying, look, we valued the neighbor's properties at. But again, if they valued them high, you know what to say. Like, just because they didn't show up to listen to Mike talk about this doesn't mean I'm buying into that. And I'm not even going to dignify it with a response. But if it's lower, if all these people are your neighbors and their values are lower than yours, say, whoa, that's not equitable. That's not right. But then we move on to the third portion of the evidence package, and that is your market sales. That's what every realtor, bless y'all, but we're all scrambling for inventory. We're telling you Californians are taking over. The interest rates are so low. Whatever is, I want your values to go up. I'm a real estate broker. I want you to get more, but I just don't want you to get beaten up every step along the way. And I want you to realize that except for I think maybe not even Manny's truck's a little dirty. I mean, in the sense that even though it's a new truck, it's not ready to trade in. You would go clean it up, detail it, tune it up. It's the same with our homes. Our homes are not on the market. And so we have to realize, if you're comparing me to homes that sold, what did those homes have that mine doesn't have yet? So that's where we get into maybe impeaching or criticizing their market comps. So that's what's in an evidence package. So now you get to go to an informal hearing. That used to be a courtesy. By state law, if you ask for one, you can get one. I consider it a warm-up. I consider it a practice session. You're the appraiser, I'm the taxpayer. I get the informal hearing, I call it a conversation. You get to tell me what this package means. You let them practice. And then you get to throw out a few ideas. Maybe you're ready, you think you've got everything going, and then you can make me an offer. And if I like it, I can accept it. I generally never accept it. But if you make an offer and you note the file and I make a note, now when we go in front of the panel, where are we going to go from there? Ideally, we're going to start at, we were here, you got to here, and we've made a note of it. I'm not going to impeach, I know how Bandera does it, but in Bexar County, the chief appraiser said in front of a public audience, he says, I tell all my appraisers, if you make them an offer, write it down. I don't need to get in front of the ARB panel and, well, they said this and now they're retracting it. No, if you made them an offer, then the worst case is, in my experience, the ARB panel will agree with that offer. But maybe after you've supplemented with additional evidence, or maybe you just made a better case, the ARB panel says, you know what, I'm not sure that the appraiser is quite hearing what we're hearing. Because the panel's a panel of your peers. And we're going to talk about that. But again, my experience is, I'm just practicing. I even would ask you, do you love your brother? If you love your brother, and if I was your brother, what would you tell me I should have done better? And I turned you into the advisor. He said, well, if you had brought up this, this, and this, then maybe I could have done a little bit more, and maybe I don't even have the authority to give you everything that you're asking for, because in the big counties, we've got so many, we put the least experienced and friendliest people up front. Hopefully they just close in files. That's all they're not incentivized. They don't have a commission agreement to see if they can beat you out of some tax dollars. So now you go to the formal panel, and I hope that I don't say anything, but you're going to appreciate this because they're not necessarily real estate experts. Is that a fair statement?
totally fair.
Thank you. So they're trained only in hearing procedures. I am such a geek that I paid, well, I gave a day of my life to take the course. And I have to share this, and now that I've shown you, she's gonna appreciate this. I got to page 2, and it says, Appraisal Review Board dues and don'ts. I'm gonna ask you if you would read, if you were taking the course to be on the panel, what was number 4 say?
All the don'ts,
Yes.
don't let your attention wander and don't sleep if you're not hearing.
Now, I don't know about you, but usually I get a better laugh, because can you imagine? This is the standard by which the comptroller is encouraged to remind you, and I'm not picking on R5, okay? But this is the standard, because they're listening to these cases 15 minutes at a time. Chop, chop, we got a lot of cases, we gotta get you in, get you out, so we're gonna let you get started, we're gonna counter it, we're gonna go back and forth, and we're gonna make a decision. Thank you very much, it's been fun playing the game, but remember, these are not real estate experts. So those of you who are real estate professionals, I'm gonna use that word for the first time to describe you as something other than an agent or a broker, because you're here. You took this course. I want you to consider yourself a professional. You might offer your help to the community, and then those people might remember you for referring the next opportunity to make a sale.
You know, when I was going to real estate school, there was a girl going to real estate school with me that worked at the CAD, and the reason why she was going to real estate school was so that she could get into MLS and find out what properties are sold, so she could have that at the CAD.
Shame on her, but if you wanna hear something funny, there's one that works in Bear County, who's an ordained minister, and she handles all the tax exemptions. Can you imagine me defending this tax exempt entity against her, and they were debating over, you know, who handled out more Bibles or something. It was ridiculous, but again, they shouldn't have access to that, and if that's how the county wants to approach it, more power to them. But they make mistakes. You can have all the access you want, but do you do the due diligence? But this is what the panel does consist of. I take it to the lowest level of, they're not sleeping, right? They're not real estate people, but they're either thinkers or feelers. And in the English-speaking population, this little Rubik's Cube describes all of us. We either come forward with our emotions in response to something, or we come forward with our thoughts. So I like to say a high feeler is a red. I use colors because I don't have any bias about what you are. I think of that occupationally as somebody who would be a salesperson, right? They're like, they have some personality, they're coming at you with you're trying to motivate you to make a deal. Yellow would be, I think, more like a receptionist, still coming at you with personality, but they're saying, here, you know, can I get you something to drink? The doctor will be with you in a little bit. You know, the heart surgeon, that's the green, doesn't have any personality necessarily. We don't care if they do. All I want to make sure that they do is if I need a heart transplant, I want them to get it from a revenue officer, right? Because those people haven't used their hearts. But I don't care about their bedside manner. Just make sure you don't kill me when you have me on the table. But the blues are more like myself before I actually learned to look you in the eye. They're accountants. They'll look you at the shoes. You know, maybe if they're really extroverted, they'll look you at the belt buckle, and they'll have a conversation about your bookkeeping. But what you need to recognize from this matrix is that we all fall into one of those 4. Are y'all together? And who would you say is the feeler of the 2? She's the only one that got an answer. So he's the thinker. I can tell his mind's brewing. He's videotaping me. So without her, she's the feeler, right? Without her, life would just be boring. I mean, when you met her, you're like,
Think about your answer.
Oh, I do.
Without go home. Without you, the world doesn't go away. I know. But without him, you might be in jail. No, I'm teasing.
No, very much so.
But that's what I'm getting at is it opposites attract, right? And so you might take, and I can give you a handout, and you can go home and which one am I? And what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? But all of these social styles have strengths and weaknesses. So if I'm talking to a panel and I've got 2 of him and 1 of you, or 2 of you and 1 of him, you might want to see pictures. You want to see more than just a bunch of data. He just wants the facts. So if I want to appeal to a panel of 5, and that's what we've got. We've got 5 people on a panel in Bandera. There's a good chance they're not all 5 fact finders. And we didn't interview them, did we? We just got the 5 that would take the nominal amount that was paid. They're not overpaid, I can assure you that. And they work hard all day long to just hear cases, process the information. So if you know going in that there may be 3 thinkers, 2 feelers, 3 feelers, 2 thinkers, you're gonna give them a little bit of both what they want. You're gonna flex your style to the style of the panel, which is gonna be mixed between feeling and thinking. So if you remember nothing else about communication, inform with facts, entertain with images, and that'll inspire more empathy and sympathy from the panel, because they'll connect with you. Sometimes they want to see the pics, some want to see facts. But remember, you've got 4 times the amount of argument that the county does. The county just has a mass appraised value. You now know to come in with a description that's accurate, a condition that's specific, location issues, and you may have to point out to them some of their market data, even though they might have access to the multiple listing service, they may not know how to read it the way Vicky might, okay? So normally I'd be done, but I'm gonna go through a presentation case because somebody sitting there, just like you, said, I think I'm tracking with what you're suggesting. And so Mr. Cifuentes, you may not be able to see all this, but he just acknowledged, I got a 17-year-old house, and I know I need to paint it, I need to do some windows, I need some flooring, and then he got to the whatabouts. And what are the whatabouts? Well, just what they are, just what it described. It's, well, what about this? What about the fact that I'm next to a green belt, but it's a mosquito farm, because nobody maintains it? What about the fact that I'm up on a hill, and I was the last man out of my neighborhood because it was like a ski slope? And I'll show you a picture of that. So you had some whatabouts. And the reason you want to milk the whatabouts is because, like this incredible author said, Trey Gowdy, he says, it never hurts to ask. Because you just don't know if that appraisal review board panel member says, I got the same issue. They may not even say it out loud, but right, there were many times when you had the panel going like this, when the appraiser's like, whatever. But they were sympathetic to your presentation. They were sympathetic to your cause. And so now for the feelers, right? We've been overwhelming you with a lot of facts, but now you're like, yeah, painting? I know everybody knows what painting is, but isn't it better to show an example of what your painting issues are? And now, here's a bid from Mr. Rodriguez. And I prefer it not to be Mr. Rodriguez, your friendly, low bid, labor only. If you'll buy the materials, that's not the bid you want. You want the bid within a relevant range, the high end of the range of the most pristine painting that you can do. Not quite Michelangelo, but you definitely don't want to go in there with your low bid. Then there's windows. We all know what windows look like, but doesn't it kind of relax you a little bit? You know, you got a picture of the broken window. Now, you don't have to have a picture of all 15 windows that are broken, but you're setting the tone. And you say, look, and here's my cost if I replace those windows that were new to the home 17 years ago, that are going through all kinds of heck, that are no longer the contemporary windows that we're finding in the properties that have been remodeled or rehabbed. And so, oh, and look at the floor. Where the dishwasher, somebody didn't know what a concentrate was, and so it overflowed, and it stained the floor, or removed the stain on part of the floor. And while I was figuring that out, I realized the carpet was that old shag that I still haven't replaced. It actually got a little mildew. And there's my flooring bid. So you start to see the presentation strategy. It just is human nature. It sounds like common sense, but I can't tell you how many people have sat there and said, you know, I'm firing the guy that's been representing me. In 8 years, he never asked me for a single picture. Well, because he wants to brag that he can take market data and compare market data, and we got you an adjustment. We'll talk about that in a second.
So these are a list of things that you would do if you were getting ready to prepare your property for sale, so it would match some of these high price sales that in your neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because they said it was market value, you're not going to market, this is what you would do. This is what Vicky or other realtors would say to you is, and in fact, I would encourage you, you've got several choices right here, ask them for a seller's disclosure form. Because besides having you sign a listing, the first thing we do is give you, besides our information about brokerage services.
That's right.
And yes, I know you guys are trying to catch me, I'm doing my best to stay ahead of you, but they would give you a seller's disclosure form, and it's like a checklist of all the things they wanna prompt you to say, don't let me commit a fraud, I don't wanna be accused of a fraud, I don't know your house. But don't let me get in the middle of saying something that's not true, and you know all these things. So you might wanna provide this gentleman a seller's disclosure form, but now, look, we're on a roll, right? We're telling the appraisal review board panel, the appraiser doesn't have time, they haven't been to my home, they don't know my issues, and if they think they could come by Manny's today, they don't know what it looked like January 1st, but we can show them. So now I'm backing out. I'm saying not only do we have property condition issues within, I don't know if they've really considered the fact that Mr. Cifuentes' home is next to a green belt, otherwise I call mosquito farm, right? A commercial lot that hasn't been maintained. Even though he lives on a cul-de-sac, which is what probably prompted him to think he was moving into a quiet end of the neighborhood, the way I look at it is if I was a criminal, I could get from Highway 281 over to his house, steal everything I want, and I'd be halfway to Laredo or wherever it is I'm going to dump this stuff before the sheriff found their way to the front door, right? I mean, because that's how they're finding the property, they're finding it through the front door, through the front address. So does that represent a risk? Yes. And I'm gonna use everything that I can to make the case against my property having value. We're not talking about going to market, right? We're changing the channel of our thoughts. But if you close with, and look at this, look at my fence, and look at my flat work. And I know the appraisers, they've got every standard expression. Well, we don't consider fences. Well, but I'll promise you that Vicki was, I'm picking on you, so I hope you don't mind. If you're listing a home that's got a fence and you got another one that doesn't have a fence, then you're probably gonna say, well, that's why we want a few dollars more for this one, because it's got a fence and it's in good repair, or the flat work's been done. So, but just when you think that we're done, look at what he's got. He's got a rectangle stuffed inside of a pie-shaped lot. Now, I know that if we were marketing it to him, we'd say, well, look, this is great. You can have the grandkids here, the barbecue here, and look, we can separate the risk of them getting their hands in the fire by some floral area. You know, maybe a pool or something. But that's not what I say when I'm talking to the government. I say to the government, this is an irregularly shaped piece of property with a waste of land that I don't know what the architect was thinking, because all he could think of was a box, but it didn't really maximize the utilization of the land. So is it really the best use of my property? I don't know. I don't know what that panel's perception is. That's one of my whatabouts. How about this one? I'm gonna close with a little bit of humor on Mr. Cifuentes. Look, Mom, no rails. You know, I mean, danger, Will Robinson. I mean, at my age, you know, going up and down those steps, or even coming out of that. He was the last man out of his neighborhood, or after Stoughton, because that was a ski slope. Especially when you compare it to those properties, where it was all flat. So, these are just a few ideas, but you may have other ones. Roofing, waterproofing, foundations. I'm not putting limits. This isn't meant to constrain your concerns, it's meant to provoke you to thinking through it. That's why I think the seller's disclosure form would be a really nice touch. I can't encourage y'all enough. If you've got past clients, just if you do nothing else, let's send them the seller's disclosure form. Say, if you're protesting, you might want to use this. Might prompt to say it, might prompt to list it. So, heating and AC in Atascosa, I always like to say, always bring up your plumbing. Because the chief appraiser, putting on a little seminar, said, oh, I had to replace all my plumbing because it was not quite the right PVC or something, or it had been recalled. So I jokingly say, if you're in Atascosa, always talk about your plumbing. But any recommendations are welcome. I mean, it might be a power line. I always learn something when I come to these, because it doesn't hurt to ask. You just don't know what the panel's going to empathize. They may not say it out loud, but you know, if I'm a veteran, I'm going to make sure that people know I'm a veteran. Go in there with your hat on, because you don't know if someone on that panel appreciates that you made that sacrifice. But these are my do's and don'ts. Unlike this, I think it's clear you're not going to fall asleep, but be polite and pleasant, okay? Because it doesn't gain you anything to take them on personally, and it doesn't set well in front of the panel if you're rude. towards the appraiser, like they've already agitated you because they gave you a notice of value and they didn't make you an offer at the informal. It's not personal, but don't go first. And the panel's gonna ask you, would you like to go first? And I always say, no, thank you. And if you were the appraiser, I'd say, my mother taught me better, women first. But even if it was a man as the appraiser, I'd say, no, thank you, I'd like the government to go first. Why? Because we know what the government's gonna say. We want the government to go first. We know what they're gonna say, go ahead, you got the first 4 minutes. You tell us everything you've already told me at the informal, and I'll even hit the mute button in case I've got a spouse there or a taxpayer there so that they don't blurt out something. And if you say something that's inappropriate or just so extremely wrong, I'm just gonna make a written note. I'm on mute. You talk all you want. I'm not gonna interrupt you because I'm not gonna give that panel the opportunity to say, well, you know, that taxpayer goes to rude to you. And they've been eating and drinking the same coffee, you know, all day long. So sometimes the perception is that they're aligned. They're not aligned. But that's how sometimes it appears and we misread it. So I'm gonna let you have your 5 minutes and then I'm gonna have my 5 minutes, or maybe it might be 4. And then I'm gonna move on to my case. And when I make my case, then you've seen it. But that's why I don't go first. But even if in the process of me making my case, you were to come back to me, sir, and make an offer, I will still not accept your offer. And the reason at this point I'm not gonna accept it is because I've done all this trouble to get in front of the panel. I mean, you better knock my socks off, because I'm gonna say thank you very much. Because she's gonna ask, would you like to accept it? Because if you do, the hearing's over, we're done. And you know, they don't have to do anything. We've come to an agreement. And I know you might be tempted to, but I always say, no, thank you. I appreciate that. However, I don't feel, panel, you've given enough consideration to fill in the blank. Not so much because I don't appreciate the intent, but if I don't let the panel rule, I don't have the right to go to arbitration. We're done. So by letting the panel rule, you have 60 days to consider, no, I think the panel was asleep. I don't think they really were sympathetic. And I think the appraiser missed the boat. And I'm gonna go to arbitration. Panel's done, I'm never gonna see them again. I'm going to arbitration, and I'm gonna have an arbitrator assigned that may not even be from Bandera County. In fact, I can specifically say, I don't want them from Bandera County. I don't care where they're from in Bandera County. You know, if I've got I want arbitration, and I've got a home in the Dominion or some affluent area, like, I don't want somebody from Bandera County. I don't want them to be well discriminated against. So I'd rather have somebody from Beaumont or Houston, and they're gonna do it by video or telephone anyway. So what's the inconvenience? None. So you keep your peace, you don't become attached to the outcome. If you've ever played golf, I can tell you the best advice you'll get is don't set a mark that you could possibly exceed. So don't get hung up on, if I get to this, I'll be happy. Don't put limits on what God might allow you to achieve by doing what we're telling you. So I'm going to move a little quicker. The reason I say this year is the year of arbitration is because in Bandera there was only, I think, she said 2. I gave her the benefit, maybe she missed it, to 3. But there's no more than a handful of people who have used the route of arbitration. And I can tell you the media gets it wrong, because in Big Bad Bear County, they say, oh, appraisals are up, notices of protests are up to 160,000. Then they have the John Taxpayer, what are you doing? Oh yes, I'm protesting. And the appraiser then is quoted, well, if you'll bring pictures and images and facts, you know, we work with you. And then they close with, and if you don't get satisfaction at the appraisal review board, you can always file a lawsuit. Yeah, and who's got $2,500 to give as a retainer to a lawyer? You don't need to file a lawsuit to go to arbitration. You don't need a lawyer. You don't even need a representative. If the page is about as long to file a request for arbitration as it is to file a notice of protest. And what also comes with that is the possibility that the county will say, wait a minute, if we lose the arbitration, we have to pay the arbitrator. So maybe we need to revisit. Let's come back, because you really did show me some things I didn't consider. And so maybe we don't want to go in front of an arbitrator. So let's go back to Mr. Cifuentes, because look what happened with him. He was at 320. That was what the county put him on notice at. And he said, you know, made his case, and before the panel could rule, the appraiser said, what about 300? And literally, I wasn't representing him, I was behind the camera. And when the appraiser made the offer of 300, I was like a third base coach. Do it, you know, I mean, I almost got in front of him, he's not gonna do it. But he was smart, he looked at his wife, that's always smart, and then he looked back at me, and he said, no, he got the message. So we didn't accept the 300 that you generously offered in front of the panel, and the panel ruled it 290. So I'm like, awesome, we lowered it 30,000 in value, we're done, it's been fun. And he said, this is so much fun, what else can we do? I thought, oh my gosh, I've created a monster. This is he planned to give it a break. But if you really wanna know, you could go to arbitration. But then you have to state a value. Then you have to establish a low point. So if you and I are in a tug of war, and you're at 290, and I say 240, then what's the midpoint? 265. And if I can get the arbitrator, I'm gonna treat you now as the arbitrator, if I get the arbitrator to rule at 264, 999, guess what happens? The county has to pay the arbitrator. So now the county's got a little skin in the game. Sometimes the county says, you know, I think you got a good case. Panel was asleep at the wheel. They didn't quite grasp it, but I think you're gonna probably do well. And you can continue to add more evidence, right? You might have learned something in the formal that you didn't realize. In his case, he got it down to 260. So he lowered it from 320 to 290 to 260, doubled the amount of discounted value because he went to arbitration. So he wins, congratulations, because his evidence was clear and convincing. I mean, you saw the evidence. He has some issues. It was relevant, it was reliable, and unlike being a victim of a murder, I mean, he was alive to give testimony, right? He's not a murder victim. And he's a qualified witness. He knows the property better than anybody. And he followed this logic, what I told you in the first half of this. And I just happened to have a stop sign, so I thought this was kind of cute, so I had to take a picture. I didn't steal the sign. But let's look at his numbers. Because his values were 302 and 307 and 310, he had never protested. He decided to protest, and if he had agreed to the 290, the following year, for assessment purposes, under state law, because it's his homestead, it could have only gone up to 319,000. That's for tax purposes. Now, this was the year of COVID, so arbitrations were taking a little while. But before we'd ever gotten to the arbitration, the government saw fit to raise his market value from 290 to 361. He hadn't done anything. The house looked the same. But they were, again, gaming the system, knowing 80% of Bexar County residents weren't protesting. What's the harm? It gets better. But because he went to arbitration and lowered it to 260, the cap, the most the value could go up is 10% from the prior year. So I'm gonna go back to the 290 that he was offered, which would have been limited to 319, still good, right? Or, in his case, he lowered the following year's value to 286 because it could only go up 10%. So some people are gonna be asking this year that are protected by the 10% homestead cap, but this market value is going through the roof thanks to the comptroller's property value studies that have been forced down the chief appraiser's throat by virtue of penalizing the school district if they don't meet those numbers within a certain range. And I'm not the expert, she could speak better to that, but I think I've said it adequately enough for our purposes. This number has to come down below the homestead cap to give it any tax relief in the immediate sense, if that's the circumstance. So should I waste my time? And my answer to you is this. You're doing it for your neighbor's sake, at the very least, because they may be using your number against the neighbor. What about if we go through a market correction, right? What if interest rates go up, inflation, and suddenly Bandera isn't the hot spot that it is this year, or San Antonio, or Texas in general? Do you want to be arguing that you didn't argue 361 last year when maybe you could have gotten it down to 320? Even if it didn't save you any tax dollars, it sets the tone for the conversation you're going to, because until they come through the tax reform, until the legislature really gets serious, we're going to be like deer in deer season. It's going to happen every year. They're going to come hunting for our dollars. So, quick review: file your protest. Not this. I didn't correct this. May 31st. attend the informal hearing, follow up to it, re-prepare if you've learned something, and worst cases, request arbitration. As for land, I want to point out to you some, the points already been made, but I'll reiterate. Some of you are just talking about land, or you're hearing about land issues. Land, are we comparing similar size to similar size? I mean, we go to Costco, somebody said Costco earlier, because we can get a better deal on a higher volume. Sometimes that's not understood. That if you buy 5 acres, don't compare 5-acre prices, with a 1-acre price, right? So you don't want to be compared to properties of different sizes. You also don't want to be compared to properties of different shapes. If yours is irregular, and theirs is a perfect rectangle, what about location? What if theirs is on a corner and yours isn't? And last but not least, topography. That's like comparing, if this is a plate, right here, if this was a plate, if I turn it over and if it was a bowl turned over, it's gonna have less the area by which I can build on. So those are the characteristics you want to use when you're being compared to other properties. That's a picture of Mr. Amesquita. Myself, we're smiling because this gentleman is not a very happy camper. That's the gentleman with that manufacturing facility that our son is out. And he's got a master's in economics and all this other good stuff. He came out of that at 3.3 million, they lowered it to 3.1. I said, don't worry about it, we're gonna go to either a lawsuit or arbitration. We filed a case. We never saw the inside of a courtroom. They came to a deal with us, 1.6 million. It's a huge adjustment, but it resulted from us just taking it to the next level. So, what is the requirements to go to arbitration? You have 60 days. So the panel's ruled, you walked away, you're a little irritated, maybe you're even kind of feeling good. You have 60 days before you have to make a decision. So I would say if you're gonna call me to get my 2 cents worth, call me in 30 days. Don't wait till the 59th day, you don't have to call me the day you're still irritated. But, on the 30th day, decide whether you wanna continue to play the game and move on to another opportunity to contest the value that they ruled at. And you're gonna issue a cashier's check to the comptroller. That's a deposit, because for $450, if your property is less than $500,000 and it's your homestead, the comptroller is going to keep $50 to administer this assignment of the case. But the $400 is what's at risk to whoever is the winner or the loser, right? You're the appraiser, you're representing the county, you're at $290. I thought it should have been $240, and somewhere in between is our midpoint. If I get the arbitrator to rule below the midpoint, guess what county you're paying for? And I've seen the county sometimes, because there was only 2 in this county last year, according to what they told me on the phone an hour ago. So they're not used to this, and they may not want to play the game. They may want to say, what will it take to get this settled today? Truth case, in Monterey, Texas, rural area outside of Southwest Bexar County. The former mayor, who's a brilliant attorney, he said, I've got a single wide, and I've added a little bit. They wanted it 365. I said, well, why don't you go to arbitration? He says, oh, okay. This is a lawyer asking me. I said, just put up 450. So he puts up 450, and we fill out the form. I said, you need to give me a number. He said 240. 365, 240. So I get the lady on the phone, and she's like trying to decide whether she's gonna send it up to the state or is she gonna get it settled. She says, Mike, manufactured homes are going up in value. I said, I don't know what world you're living on, but whatever you want to believe. I said, well, I appreciate that. What are you thinking? She says, well, it's out in Von Ormy, and she's never been there. She wasn't very respectful of the neighborhood. And she says, well, I'm not going lower than 3.25. I said, well, I appreciate that. Well, why don't we get him on the phone? He's a nice guy. He's attorneys, they like to talk, they're argumentative. Let's just hear him out. So he gets on the phone, very politely explains that not all of it's air conditioned, blah, 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 blah. She says, well, what about 310? I said, well, what about 280? Okay. She said, well, what about meet you in the middle of 295? And that was it. And here, you can have your check back. So we went from 365 to 295, and all it was a conversation. I tell you these stories because it empowers me to try and inspire y'all, that you tell as many people as possible, file the protest on May 31st or sooner, ask for the evidence, and if you don't want to play the game, that's okay. But at least, I mean, if everybody got a ticket from the sheriff for last year saying you were driving while intoxicated, I think most of you would say, well, I don't think he knows what I drank. And I don't remember drinking that day, you know, and I don't even know that I was driving that day. I mean, this is how ridiculous I think this process is. And I mean, no disrespect to the people who are part of the process, but it's ridiculous that we as Texans can't just say, you know what, we're gonna consider what you have to say, but we're not afraid to take you on. Because, I mean, we're gonna change this, and we're gonna now have a Bandera County Taxpayers Association. I know there's a Bandera chat that everybody likes to jump on. Maybe we just need to get more of the 2,000 plus to start talking on a social media platform and sharing their stories, maybe encouraging each other. Because it's not something personal. And I'm so blessed that, you know, we've got a host that was on the ARB. I mean, she's had all the opportunity to throw me out, hasn't done it yet, hopefully she won't. But does that give you a little bit, is there any questions that I maybe haven't gotten to? Because I'm all for them. But that's pretty much the presentation, and I'll be happy to send it to you.
I had went to an informal on one of mine, and, the appraiser said that he was gonna come to my house and take pictures of damage, cause I told him I'd rotten wood and all that kind of stuff. And he never showed up. So then I showed up for the informal, and I brought pictures because he didn't show up, and he told me my pictures were deceiving. So I said, okay, I want a formal. So we went into a formal. And then when I was passing my pictures around, I said, the appraiser that's sitting right there is the one who told me that my pictures are deceiving. And I mean, they cut it off real fast. They were like, oh, yeah, we'll keep it the way that it was.
Well, and you had to raise your right hand, and you had to say that everything you were gonna say was the truth.
Right, right,
And I don't appreciate that somebody would suggest they knew your intent.
yes.
And so I appreciate you sharing that, but remind them,
Yeah,
you know, everything I've said, I've already been sworn in.
yeah,
And if I'm not gonna question your integrity,
right,
then I would appreciate the same. But if we're gonna get past all this,
yeah, it was a bad experience, but yeah.
well, and now you know that you had 60 days that, you know, you might have even brought it up at arbitration. It's like, listen, you know, I'm only here because I felt like I was insulted, and I felt